Mohammed, do you sleep at night? How do you sleep?
Once our oil is finished, we'll return to the camel era. That's what Saudi-born Sheikh Al-Jabbar warned, but is this prophecy true? Saudi Arabia is a rich, powerful nation, but built entirely on one thing: oil. But what happens when the wells run dry and the world no longer needs it? For nearly a century, oil has fueled Saudi Arabia's rise from a tribal kingdom in the desert to a global economic heavyweight. Oil has bought skyscrapers, subsidies, and silence. It's built palaces, cities, and influence. It's the glue holding a fragile social contract together. Wealth in exchange for loyalty, obedience in exchange for luxury. But is that era ending? And can this kingdom ruled by monarchy and steeped in tradition really transform into a diversified modern economy? To understand what's really at stake, we have to go back to where it all began, before the oil, before the riches, and before the kingdom. Saudi Arabia's oil story starts not with technology or capitalism, but with conquest. In the early 20th century, Abdulaziz ibn Saud unified the Arabian Peninsula after decades of tribal warfare, resistance from the Ottomans, and colonial interference. On September 23, 1932, he declared the birth of the modern state, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which literally bears the name of his family, Al Saud. However, to maintain stability and bring a range of nomadic people together, he needed a plan for economic growth. In 1938, he found it. Standard Oil of California struck oil at Daman No. 7. This is not just any oil field, but Lucky No. 7 is one of the richest oil fields on planet Earth. Suddenly, the desert kingdom became petrostate. Revenue surged, and with it came infrastructure, urbanization, power, and global relevance. Now, here's the thing, having oil doesn't automatically make a country rich or stable. In fact, in many cases, it does the opposite. Economists call this the natural resource curse. The resource curse isn't about having too much of a natural resource like oil or gas. It's about what the wealth from that natural resource does to a country. And more often than not, when a country's main resource or income is this natural resource, it's a recipe for instability. Natural resource wealth can distort a nation's economy. It can drive up currency values, making exports more expensive and other industries less competitive. It concentrates power around that resource and invites rent-seeking behavior, or people profiting from how close they are to controlling that resource like oil. This can lead to corruption on a massive scale. Therefore, the real issue isn't the resource itself, it's how the money is managed. Where does the wealth actually go, and who really controls it? Take Nigeria, for example, a textbook case of the resource curse. Billions of oil revenue flow through the economy every year. But here's what actually happens. A huge chunk of that money is siphoned off by transnational oil corporations. The rest, it ends up with the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, a government-owned entity that does something bizarre. It drills the oil and regulates the industry at the same time. In other words, the same hands that profit is supposed to police itself. The result of this? Massive corruption, missing billions, and a political system warped around protecting oil wealth rather than distributing it. This isn't just an economic flaw, it's a structural flaw. The resource becomes the prize, not the foundation. And instead of building a nation, it fractures it. So, why doesn't this happen in Saudi Arabia itself? One reason is the political structure. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. Power isn't shared, but is centralized under one banner. This means fewer competing interests and a greater ability to maintain control. Nigeria, on the other hand, is a very ethnically diverse country with 371 ethnic groups. Therefore, the control of oil-producing areas can cause significant regional conflict in Nigeria.
My fight was that government should know that we own the oil.
Second, oil revenues meant a new social contract quietly took shape too. As long as the monarchy provided financial security, free healthcare, jobs, housing, infrastructure, the people would offer political loyalty in return. It's not democracy, but it worked for the region. So the key difference? Saudi Arabia used its oil money to buy stability, not just line its pockets. That doesn't mean it was clean. Billions were lost to inefficiency and corruption, but the system has held together. In 2008, oil hit $147 a barrel. In 2016, it crashed to just $33. In 2020, it collapsed again due to COVID-19. Saudi Arabia survived this thanks to massive financial reserves. But the volatility exposed a deeper truth. This model is unsustainable. Oil prices are more unstable than ever. And now there's a bigger threat. The world is moving away from oil entirely. Electric vehicles, climate policy, and renewables are reshaping global energy demand. Some analysts think 2019 may have been peak oil. Even Shell says its oil production likely peaked that year. Saudi Arabia still has the cheapest oil to produce, but even the most efficient well doesn't help if there's less demand to buy. So the country is now racing to diversify. By the mid-2010s, it became clear that Saudi Arabia had a choice: reinvent itself or risk irrelevance. Following two devastating oil crashes in less than a decade, the Saudi leadership recognized that its oil dependence model was no longer sustainable. Oil was too volatile. Foreign investment was drying up, and the population, 70% of whom are under the age of 35, needed jobs alone that oil couldn't provide. Enter Vision 2030, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's grand strategy to future-proof the kingdom. Vision 2030 is an attempt to totally rebrand the nation. The goals were sweeping. Shift the kingdom's GDP away from oil, spark innovation in tech, tourism and entertainment, attract foreign investors, and reshape Saudi society into a modern, open economy. On the surface, it looked like progress. Movie theatres reopened for the first time in decades. Women gained the right to drive and work in new sectors. The country launched music festivals, fashion weeks, and even joined the Formula One calendar. Even the greatest footballer of all time joined the Saudi League. A new narrative was emerging, one where Saudi Arabia was no longer a closed petrostate, but a rising hub of global commerce and culture. But here's the truth. Despite the PR blitz and architectural ambition, the economic foundations don't seem to be shifting fast enough. Okay, let's look at the data. In 2016, the private sector made up just 40% of GDP. By 2024, just 42.7%. Foreign direct investment, a cornerstone of Vision 2030, dropped to a dismal 0.57% of GDP. Unemployment among Saudi nationals still hovering around 11.7%. It's virtually unchanged. And while non-oil exports have grown, they are far below the pace that Vision 2030 sets out. Instead of structural reform, what's emerged is development by spectacle. Gargantuan projects like Neom, the 500 billion sci-fi city, or Kidda, an entertainment hub the size of Las Vegas. These are moonshots meant to dazzle investors and create headlines. Of course, they are amazing, but so far they've mostly consumed capital rather than generated it. And so here's the real issue. Businesses don't just chase opportunity, they chase trust. Saudi Arabia is still a country where power is centralized, the legal system is opaque, and speech is tightly controlled. Global investors might admire the ambition, but many are choosing more stable, transparent environments like the UAE or Singapore. Saudi Arabia is trying to leap from the oil kingdom to a modern powerhouse without building the institutional scaffolding needed in between. Vision 2030 isn't failing because the goals are wrong, they're fantastic. It's struggling because transformation doesn't just require money, it requires deep reform, legal, cultural, and political. And that brings us to the most uncomfortable question of all. So here's the real tension. Economic diversification requires innovation, and innovation requires freedom. Freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and freedom of identity. But Saudi Arabia is still an absolute monarchy, and when pushed, it pushes back hard. In 2018, journalist Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The CIA believes the order came from Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince himself. It was a brutal reminder that liberalization in Saudi Arabia has its limits, and they stop at the throne. Despite the image of public liberalization, women driving, concerts, tourists beyond visiting Mecca, the state still controls dissent with an iron fist. So therefore, we need to answer these 3 questions. Can you build a modern global economy without modern freedoms? Can a society embrace capitalism while rejecting liberalism? And most importantly, will Saudi Arabia opening up its economy eventually force open the political system? Thank you so much for watching this video, and we make videos here on building nations and helping people live better lives. If you want to continue this journey with me, please hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. And I'll be so grateful to see you in the next video.